call upon Dr. Rajiv for Mangalacharan. Dr. Rajiv.
Pranam to one and all. Om. 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 Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Deva Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parabrahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Om. 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 Vakratunda Mahakaya, Suyakati Samaprabha, Nirvignam Kurmadevasya, Sarvakayesu Sarvada. Om. Om. Saraswati Namastubhyam, Varade Kamarupini, Ararambha. Om. 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 It is over to ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rajiv. And now I would request our head of our department, Professor Anand Mishra, sir, to deliver his welcome address. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Are you Honorable Chairperson Professor Paneer Selvam-ji,
Namaskar.
our learned speaker Professor R.P. Singh-ji, convener of the seminar Dr. Priyanka Mishra-ji, Rahul Moria-ji, our colleagues, students, scholars connected to the seminar, I welcome you all in this Saturday seminar of the Department of Philosophy in Region 1, Varanasi. Friends, we have today two devoted scholars of hermeneutics and postmodernism, Professor Paneer Selvam and Professor R.P. Singh-ji. I, on behalf of the department and all our colleagues, extend warm welcome to both these scholars. Our learned speaker today is Professor R.P. Singh. He is Professor of the Department of Philosophy, JNU. He is one of the founder members of the department. In fact, due to efforts of people like him, that today we have a full-fledged department in Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor R.P. Singh will today speak on postmodernity. It is always very nice for me to listen to him. I hope that all of you will enjoy his lecture today. I welcome you once again, sir, in this department. Similarly, I extend warm welcome to Professor Paneer Selvam-ji. He is an eminent scholar, an orator, and above all, a great promoter of philosophy. He has been General Secretary of Indian Philosophical Congress. I welcome you, sir, in this department.
Namaskar. Namaskar.
I also welcome Professor D.A. Gangadharji, Professor Santosh Kumar Pal, Professor Samsiv Prasad, Professor S.P. Pandeji, Professor Durgesh Chaudhary and other scholars, colleagues, students who are connected to the seminar. All of you are most welcome. Thank you, Priyanka. Over to you. Priyanka.
Thank you so much, sir. Now let me give a brief introduction of our speaker and the chairperson of the seminar. So today we have Professor R.P. Singh, who needs no introduction. He has produced a lot of work in philosophy, and he's very well known. But I would like to read his CV. So first, I would like to introduce our speaker of the day, Professor R.P. Singh, sir, who has kindly agreed to deliver his lecture on Postmodernity, a rewriting of modernity. Dr. Raghavendra Pratap Singh, with 43 years of research and teaching experience, is at present Professor, Center for Philosophy, School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Sir has been twice chairperson of Center for Philosophy, thrice member of the Academic Council and of the University Court. Besides being member and chairperson of various committees in the university. He has also been twice member of ICPR and the governing body of the council, besides being member of board of studies of many universities in India. He has to credit 20 books and over 180 articles published in different peer-reviewed journals in India and abroad, besides being member of the editorial board of many national and international journals. He has participated in various national and international seminars, conferences, workshops, and symposiums. He has visited and delivered lecture at University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, USA, Harvard University, Boston, Frankfurt University, Germany, St. Augustine University, Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago, International University, Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, and many more. He has also conferred with various international awards and honors. He has so far supervised 50 PhD theses and 25 MPhil dissertations. His specialization includes German idealism, postmodernism, multiculturalism, studies in ethics, consciousness, Indian and Western perspective, civilization and culture studies, Upanishad, Vedanta, Buddhism, human rights, globalization, philosophy of education, etc. He also teaches research methodology concerning dialectics, skepticism, foundationalism, anti-foundationalism, hermeneutics, deconstructions, and etc. I welcome you, sir, for joining us today, and we are truly delighted with your presence. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. And now I would like to introduce our Professor Paneer Selvan, who is going to preside over the session today. We are honored to have him as the president of the session. Professor S. Paneer Selvan is currently visiting professor at American University of Sovereign Nation. And sir is also a professor and former head of the Department of Philosophy, University of Madras. Sir has also published 63 journals in national and international journals. And sir has expertise in the area of Western philosophy, both in traditional and contemporary continental philosophy, with special reference to postmodernism philosophy, philosophy of language, cross-cultural hermeneutics. He is also a General Secretary of Indian Philosophical Congress. And now, with the permission of the chair and head of the department, I would request our speaker to deliver his lecture. It's over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Priyanka. Good morning, everybody. So it's indeed great pleasure and privilege for me to speak, to give a lecture. This is called a Choco Lingo Lecture Series of the Department of Philosophy and Religion, Banaras Hindu University. And it's really a great pleasure for me to share some of my ideas on post-modernity, rewriting of modernity today at this time. And I'm so happy to see everybody, Professor Panir Silvam, Professor Gangadhar, Professor Samba Shiva, Professor SP, Sri Shiv Prakash ji, and everybody here, besides our friend Anand Kumar, Professor Anand Mishra. So it's indeed, great honor for me to be amidst you. And let me just place my lecture in a certain manner that I wish to put it before. Because this statement, post-modernity, a rewriting of modernity, is not my term. So this is what Jean-Francois Lyotard had said long back, that the whole idea of post-modernity is perhaps better rethought under the rubric of rewriting modernity. So that means the kind of language, the nomenclature which was used by the modern philosophers, out of that nomenclature, certain issues have been extracted and placed in a certain narrative, in a certain discourse form in the post-modernity. I'll open up that issue gradually in the course of time. But besides Lyotard, there are many other philosophers also, like Richard Kearney. He has also said the same thing, and is Hugh J. Silverman. So he has also spoken the same kind of a thing. Like Richard Kearney, he says that postmodernism enframes modernism without identity or unity. What does it really mean? That I'll explicate it. So it is fragmented, discontinuous, multiple, and dispersed, where modernism asserts centering, focusing, continuity. Once a break with the tradition has taken place, postmodernism decenters, enframes, discontinues, and fragments the prevalence of modernist ideas. This, however, does not mean that in the attempt to reinterpret or modern philosophical quest, postmodernity is in no way a way to revive the tradition, because tradition has not been revived. Rather, they have tried to take up some of the issues which have not been addressed properly within modernist discourses, and they will try to spell it out further. So Stephen, Hugh J. Silverman also had said the same kind of a thing, that postmodernism thus has no special place of origin. That means it begins within modernism itself, modernity itself. And it does not open up new field of artistic, philosophical, cultural, or even institutional activities. Its very significance is to marginalize, delimit, disseminate, and decenter the primary, often secondary works of modernist inscriptions. So, may I request Dr. Priyanka to show my slides, also to share it with everybody. That will make the job, little easier for me. So, if the slides can be shown. Now, here in the next slide, I've tried to show that there are certain central issues in modernist writings and discourses, and also there are certain marginal issues. And if we take up, from the vantage point of view, Descartes' book like Discourse on Method and the Meditations. So there are certain concepts which are at the center of it, like cogito, clearness and distinctness, primary and secondary qualities, God, existence of God, innate ideas, criterion of truth, etc. But there are certain issues which can be regarded as the marginal ones, because those issues have been used, this is the slide number 2. very few times there. So here I have placed it, the central issues and the marginal issues. Marginal issues like madness, sexuality, sin, demon, deception, uncertainty, etc. These are very marginal issues in modernist inscriptions. And then we find that in postmodernity, there is an internal departure from modernity to postmodernity. Please come to the next slide. Internal departure. That means the marginal issues of modernity become the central issues of modernity. So there's a philosophical debate on madness, on sexuality, on deception, on murder, on fantasies. In very many ways it comes out. And the central issues of modernist writings have been almost ignored by the postmoderns, because they do not take up those central issues, which later on culminates into some kind of, what is called grand narrative. So there is certain limitation in this presentation today, one that I will not explore any particular
Little
philosophy.
louder, please. Louder.
Okay. So I will not explore it in a. So I think I'm loud enough. That is 62%. Now I'm making 87%. Am I okay now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, sir. Okay. It's audible, absolutely audible.
Okay, sir. So,
Thank you.
So I will not be taking up any particular philosopher to substantiate the position. And this is one limitation of this today's lecture. I'll simply float the concepts which are there, which have been which are getting debated and discussed among the various philosophers. And the second thing is that I have not taken into account the issues concerning Indian philosophy, because there are so many such concepts which are available within Indian philosophical tradition, and also the intellectual discourses which are there, which we find in the postmodern era. So these are two limitations. Maybe on some other occasion, I will take the opportunity to speak on something very specific kind of a thing. So today, I'll just confine to very general kind of a formulation of it, so that at least the basic concepts and contending positions can reach to the audience. And later on, if the need be, I can come to something specific like on Foucault or Derrida, and on many other philosophers like Lyotard, and so many critical theories and others. Now, when we come to modernity, so how did this episode start with? So we all know that in 1632, Galileo published his book Dialogue Concerning Two Chief World Systems. This was a book which was, in fact, Galileo was the one who visited the library of Pope, and there he found that Copernicus' book on heliocentric theory was there. It was available in the library, but nobody had opened up to read it. The book was dedicated to Pope, and the book advocated the heliocentric theory, not the geocentric position. Pope, in fact, never read that book. So he just released the book, and it was gathering dust in his library. So Galileo started, reading the book, and he also made certain improvements on the telescope which Copernicus had designed, and on the basis of which he found that there are various planets, planet Jupiter, for instance, which has several moons, and those moons are not revolving around the Earth. They are revolving around the sun. And he made, very serious, observations of it, and came out with the approval of heliocentric theory and published his book. But this book, after it was published, it became a subject matter of huge criticism and condemnation. Even the church also appointed a gentleman who was a cardinal. Cardinal is a very respected position in the Roman Catholic tradition, because after cardinal, one becomes the pope. So Cardinal Bellarmine was asked to have a debate with Galileo in the open public. And he did have it. A meeting was organized. And then they agreed on 3 conditions which have to be put up as the criterion for the debate. One, that whatever you say could be regarded true, provided it has certain texts to support it. That there is some kind of book supporting it. The way we do it, whenever we give certain points, we look for the references to it, either bibliography or bibliography kind of a thing. So some reference point has to be there. Second thing is that the text which is referred to must be supported by certain institutions, because there are many texts which the institutions do not recommend, and there are certain texts which are also banned by the government. So institutions do not recommend those texts. But here they wanted a text that should be recognized by the institution. And the third thing is that that text must have the support from the authority. Now, Bellarmine was in a very comfortable position because he has the New Testament of the Bible, which was a text, and it was taught in the universities. Those days, in fact, theology was one of the subjects, very important subject to be taught in the universities. So Galileo himself was a student of theology, because there was no subject like science being taught those days. Even Newton was also not a student of science. So theology, rhetoric, and the politics kind of a thing, these are the 3 subjects which were taught during those days. So it has support from the institution, it has the support from the authority also, because church was the authority also those days. So Bellarmine was in a very comfortable position. But Galileo said that, look, I do not have any text except my own book, and I do not have any support from any institution or from any authority, but I appeal to your reason. Any one of you can come forward. I have a telescope. I will show you, you can see with your own eyes, that there are certain planets which are not revolving around the Earth, because their motion is in proportion to the movement to Sun only, not to the Earth. And then you make your own judgment. So this was the time, 1634, 35, when this meeting was organized. And unfortunately, nobody could dare to come out and make use of his own reason. So Galileo was defeated. He was asked to burn his own book in the public, and he was put under house arrest rest of his life. Now, the important thing which emerges with this episode is that modernity means that when you have the courage to make use of your own reason based on science and technology. But if you do not have courage to make use of your own reason, you believe in the church, in the tradition of those authorities, then you are you are traditional philosopher, not modern. Modernity means there is a rupture between modernity and the tradition. Modernity is not tradition. Modernity is scientific, it is rational, and it is something where human subjectivity and their decisions play a very important role. Even Descartes also, he had given his book Discourse on Method and the World to the publisher. But when he found that Galileo has been punished, then though he was living in France, which was relatively more liberal than Italy, but he brought out his manuscript from the publisher. And later on, he started publishing, separate articles from that book. 6 discourses and 6 meditations are there. So he started getting separate articles published out of it. And when there were no issues, then he got the book published later on. So this is how the episode starts. That the center shifted from religion to science, from revelation to human reason, from collective identity to something which is individual identity. So there are various terms which started emerging during modernity. Modernity has not been, very consistent or very systematic emergence, way of emergence. Because in 1688, it came out in England. And after 100 years, in 1789, it came out in France. And then, after another maybe 100 years, 1784, it came out, 1884, it came out in Germany successfully, though it had started in 1848, 1865 in Spain, 1774 in USA. So it has been very, this kind of, way of developing, not very homogeneous kind of a thing. 1857, it came out in India also. And in Soviet Union, after the Bolshevik Revolution of 1920, 1919, so that time it came out, it became a modern world, modern kind of a thing. So it has been very uneven kind of a thing. But there are certain concepts which have always been shared by almost all the modern societies. Peter Berger, in his book Facing Up to Modernity, he has brought out 5 such features: abstraction, futurity, individualism, liberation, and secularization. Secularization was the term used in 1648 Treaty of the Westphalia, and where the 30 years war between several European nations, France, Germany, Italy, Portugal, Spain, England, they came out with a kind of a compromise with that there should be separation between church and the state. And the ideas, property, and values from the church have to be taken away and given to public openness. So these are some of the basic features. And in my next 2 slides, I have spelled out 12 such features of, just a little before that, 2, 3 key indicators of modernity, one has to keep all the time in the mind. First, that when modernity came in Europe, there were twin children: science and technology, urban and industrial life. They simultaneously started emerging. So when science and technology started developing, then it was given to the industry. Industry started making use of that technology, and things were produced, so the new market was created. So urbanization was also required. So science, technology on the one hand, and industrialization and urbanization on the other, though they were simultaneously developing. So all this started developing. This is one of the key markers of European modernity. Second thing is what Immanuel Kant has done, that the 3 critiques which he wrote, pure reason, practical reason, and the judgment, and science, morals, and art, these became the 3 pillars of European modernity. In fact, these pillars were required to repudiate the claims of religion. In the very beginning of the critique of pure reason, Kant has said, addressing to the Minister of State of the Russia, that, sir, my project which you had given me to create some kind of an atmosphere where science must develop and religion is also gets its place. So he tried to develop the theory of knowledge and also a place for religion, but that religion should be within the bounds of human reason. This is the second important feature of European modernity. And the third one is about the Enlightenment rationality which came up, and that issue I'll be taking up little details later on also. But Enlightenment as one of the grand narratives of modernity. There are 3 grand narratives in modernity: Enlightenment, and Hegel's Pan-logism, and Marx's proletarian revolution. 3 grand narratives came up. Grand narratives are meta-narrative in the sense that they wanted to, address the problems and its a solution of the whole humanity. It was a huge promise made by the modern philosophers. Now I have given these 12 features of European modernity, and these can be found out, in several texts: Arnold Toynbee, Peter Berger, and various events which have taken up. So I'll just very quickly place it before you, and those of you who are interested in more details of it can contact me separately. I'll send them some materials, printed materials. Meanwhile, I have shared one article also which was published by in Sandhan. So that article, I hope it has reached to the people. So first thing is the shift from religion to science, and in modernity we find it is a system-prone thinking, and but there is also formulation of isms like humanism. Ism means set of ideas and program of action based on those ideas. So in modernity, we find that there is always some kind of an ism or the other: socialism, humanism, secularism. So it comprises of set of ideas and program of action based on those ideas. Second thing is that there is foundationalism, essentialism, and teleology, which is there in modernity. Human subjectivity, like cogito and others, that is also very important feature of European modernity. Grand narratives which are there about enlightenment, rationality, etc., which I have just spoken, and rationality, that is pure practical, and the judgment, three kinds of reason. And it was an age of criticism also. So critique is also there of these reasons. Various other concepts like democracy, human rights, secularism, toleration, justice, etc., also started emerging during this period of time. We find, elsewhere I have made a study of around 200 such new concepts which came up during modernity. So it was a very rich conceptual exercise during modernity. So we find that the whole nomenclature gets changed. So unified world order, morality, and abstraction, etc., came, and then at the same time there are marginal issues also which started emerging during this period of time. So we find that from 17th century, and Arnold Toynbee in his book A Study of History, Volume 1, he has stated that European modernity comes to an end somewhere between 1850 to 1875. So this was the period Arnold Toynbee has said that some of the assumptions of modernity started getting questioned from 1850 to 1875 period of time. And like ism, like system-prone thinking, like system being something which is, a subject, institution of, oppression, etc. Now, during 1850 to 1875, there were, 4 philosophers. Each of them were very important ones: Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Marx, and Mill. They all lived in the same period of time. And Mill and Marx, they were in London only. Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, they were in Germany, that also in Berlin and other places. But they never met one another. They never shared their ideas. A lot of contradiction was there, among them. Mutually, a lot of contradictions was there. So this was the period marked by some kind of fragmented ideas started coming up. Marx and Mill, they were there in England, in London only, but they never met each other. Marx's whole effort was to criticize liberalism and capitalism. Mill was a liberal philosopher, utilitarianism. So contradictory views were coming up, and very substantially, with full of arguments and everything else. So according to Toynbee, this was the period marked by some kind of a sign of postmodern developments. Now let me float some more ideas about it. The first thing is that when modernity came, it made certain promises to the humanity, that they will liberate the whole of humanity. Earlier, it was this kind of a promise was made by the church, but the promises made by the church failed very miserably, and modernity thought that with science and technology they will liberate the whole of humanity. And at least this was the kind of slogan given by the modern philosophers. So, and the rhetoric from 17th century to late 19th century, almost 200 years time, we found that in modernity, there was a loss of harmony. We have, like in the French Revolution, liberty, equality, and fraternity. So liberty we have in the capitalist society, equality we have in the socialist society. But what about the fraternity? Fraternity got lost. It was not found either in capitalism or in socialism. It got sandwiched somewhere. Alienation was there in the capitalist system, in the liberal ideas and ideologies. So Marx's EPM is a wonderful narrative of the kind of alienation which is there with the working class. There is alienation with the capitalists also, but Marx is not interested in that. He is interested only in the alienation of the working class. That thing he has, spelled out. And then the clash among the European nations themselves, because they all wanted to have a place under the sun. England became very dominant because capitalism came in England very soon in 1688. So after 101 years later, France became a capitalist country. Then whatever places were left, French people started, colonizing those areas. And then after another 100 years, Germany came, capitalist country. By then, there was no place left for the Germans to expand their market. So there was a tension among the capitalists themselves, because they were all trying to find out the market on earth. So this was one thing came up. And even later on, there was a Cold War period. Even today, the kind of war which is going on between Russia and Ukraine, that also is some kind of an urge of modernity only. Because though they made that they have developed so much of ideas of humanism, of secularism, of democracy, but nothing of this sort can be seen in this war, because everything is getting violated there. And the world is moving to an entirely different situation. Different kind of geopolitics is going to emerge. Maybe tomorrow there will be war between China and Taiwan, and then so forth. It is going to affect the whole geopolitics therein. But this is again a kind of feature of modernity, failure of modernity itself. Could not liberate the humanity from all the problems. Socialism collapsed, and Berlin Wall fell. First it was created, and then it fell. So this is also part of all these steps. Now, some of the features which I would like to place. Please do not think that post-modernity is something which is completely different from modernity. Within modernity itself, it was operating at a different level. And this is what I would like to explicate and place before you. So some of the features which I would like to place before you, during 70s onwards, there was increasing incredulity towards grand narratives. That they, like in the Enlightenment rationality, they wanted to liberate and emancipate the whole of humanity, but this really did not happen there. So people started, getting disappointed with the promises of the Enlightenment movement. Then there was also growing awareness of the new problems, which have emerged from, societal rationalism. Some of the new forms started emerging within the society itself, like tribal movements started coming up, regional parties started coming up, identity issues started emerging very substantially during 70s and early late 70s and early 80s, this started coming up very substantially in India, and elsewhere also it was coming up. And in the late 70s, that was the time when Soviet Union had interfered in Afghanistan. So that was the time when I had joined GNU as a PhD student here. So that was a very vibrant time, and we were all the time, busy in studying all that stuff which is developing. The world is developing in that direction. So this was one of the features that new societal rationalism started emerging. New in the sense that it was not a grand narrative kind of a thing. It was a marginalized sections, subaltern sections, tribal movements, regional movements, identity movements. These issues started coming up very substantially. And then we find there was a new explosion of information technology also in the 70s. And that was also one of the causes of the collapse of socialism, because now you can see what is happening elsewhere in the world. The television started coming up very substantially, and it has played a very important role in the social transformation. And certain new social movements also started emerging during this period of time, tribal movements particularly, and then we find Dalit movements in India started coming up. Maybe see, when I take up Indian post-modernity, then I'll take up all these issues, but these are all there. So the modernist discourse, which thought that they have got some kind of a very glassy essence in the Enlightenment discourse and everything else, that is not really so promising. It became very vacuous kind of a narrative, because of which postmodernity started coming up. Now, the origin of postmodernity is something which has to be seen, where did it originate from. So postmodernity has no special place of origin. The meeting and the function of postmodernism is to operate at the places of closure, at the limits of modernist productions and practices, at the margins of what proclaims itself to be new and a break with the tradition, and at the multiple edges of these claims to self-consciousness and auto-reflection. So the places of closure are not very well settled within modernity. It varies from philosopher to philosopher, and that's why in postmodernity you find philosophers who are having different ranges in their articulation. So everybody is not at the same platform. So postmodernity does not open up a new field of artistic, philosophical, cultural, or even institutional activities. Rather, its very significance is to marginalize, delimit, decenter the primary and often the secondary works of modernist inscriptions. So whatever we find at the primacy of the modernist writing, that is something which is not accepted by the postmoderns. They wanted to go into the marginal aspect of it. One of the things which are there, because in modernity, whatever we knew, we try to define it. Whether it is secularism, whether it is humanism, or socialism, or democracy, or human rights, we always defined it, and then we tried to practice it, accept it. But postmodernity is something which defies all definitions. Because for them, we are living in a sort of reality which is so fragmented, diverse, and contradictory, conflictual, that it cannot be defined in universal terms. Modernity was some kind of a universal which was given to us. Certain universals like Greek universal, Plato gave us the Greek universal kind of a thing. And then Enlightenment was another universal, which was given to us. But postmodernity was a critique of those universals. So postmodernity defies definition precisely because it is not a given thing. an entity locatable in time and space. This is something very important one, and I'll just explicate it. Besides, it belongs to the very essence of postmodernity to stay away from definitions. Because if you define it, then you are a modernist. But if you are not in a position to define it, and you are just living in the world of mood or some kind of a nostalgia which is there, so it is simply an attitude which you have, then it becomes postmodern. It is very attitudinal, very moody kind of a phenomenon which is there. So, and absorb all attempts to capture the truth in the propositions. Also, because postmodernity is not the same in art and literature, in architecture, or in the dance, in philosophy, or in other language games. It cannot precisely be pinpointed. So we cannot have a pointed position of it. So how to look at postmodernity? What I thought about it is that its basic mood is some kind of a nostalgia. Nostalgia for the unattainable. Just as in case of Heidegger, we find because Heidegger, when he was trying to understand what is being, pure being, and then he thought that he has to go into the past. He went to the Greek philosophy and even pre-Socratic philosophers, where he found that there is an attempt to understand the being as something which is, expressing itself. So that kind of an attempt which is there, aletheia kind of a thing, and but still he was not very satisfied with that. In fact, we find that Heidegger, towards the end of it, he becomes a poet, and perhaps he thought that in poetry being is manifested. He was very much influenced by his friend, Hölderlin. So for almost 10 years, from 1935 to 1945, Heidegger kept on writing on Hölderlin's poems. In fact, it is Heidegger who made Hölderlin a philosopher, because he was giving a philosophical reflection on all those things. So we find that postmodernity is basically a kind of, some sort of a nostalgia, looking into the past, trying to find out it's something which is really unpresentable, but they want to present it. So in Indian tradition, we find it like Moola Prakriti in Sankhya philosophy, and then you have the Prakriti also. So, or Nasadiya Sukta kind of a thing, or inverted tree. But that discourse I'll take up some other time. So they have also said that there is an incredulity in the older modes of defining, appropriating, and recomposing the objects of artistic, philosophical, literary, and social languages. And they also argued that the dissolution of the very boundary between language and its object. So, in fact, in the earlier times, the way the language and its object were thought was no longer relevant in the postmodern discourses, because in the language there are many meanings which we generally defer for a fairly long time. So this again is a an issue which is very substantially there. Now, this is another feature of postmodernity, that it is not an ism, the way we find it in the in modernity, that it is not a system-prone thinking. So postmodernity is not goal-directed or a rule-governed movement. Straight lines and simple ideas, these cannot be found in the postmodern writings. It is not a set of ideas. It is a condition of the avant-garde consciousness. So some persons who are themselves aware of certain things, and they have their own expressions of it. It is simply an attitude or some kind of a moody reflection of the of the interactions. Now I'll take up one or two such issues to substantiate this point. For instance, if we look at the Enlightenment started with John Locke, and then there are a number of philosophers who are there, like Hume, Voltaire, Condorcet, Rousseau, Mill. But finally, it comes to what Kant has developed in his article answer to the question, what is enlightenment? It's a very small article of just 7-8 pages, but it is full of various ideas. The article was written after the Critique of Pure Reason was published, and then before the publication of Critique of Practical Reason, because Kant was also not satisfied with the publication of Critique of Pure Reason. So he was in the process of preparing for the Practical Reason. So in between, he got the offer to make some reflection on, what is it to be enlightenment. And there he gave up, this kind of a thinking, that in knowing, feeling, and willing, we do not require any kind of a mentor. So it is an ability or courage to think ourselves with courage and, boldness and all that. So it has given rise to certain concepts, 7-8 such concepts, which are very substantive to the understanding and articulation of enlightenment as a grand narrative of the time. The other two grand narratives, like Hegel's Pan-logism and Marx's proletarian revolution, that I will not take up because it will go beyond the time limits of it. So postmodernity is a critique of this grand narrative, because enlightenment made a promise to emancipate the whole of humanity, but since emancipation is based on the availability of science and technology, and during Kant's own time, until fairly long time, almost in the beginning of the 20th century, we find that only 30 to 35% people had access to electricity. So if this facility is not at all available, then how can you think of other facilities of the modernist, contention? So it was a vacuous promise which Europeans, they had made during modernity. And according to postmoderns, we have to revisit it. Though the moderns have given very strict logic and rationality to justify their position, that's why the postmoderns, they defy that rationality also. That logic is no longer operating into it. Now, I have given some of the features of the terms in which the Enlightenment rationality was criticized. So, in fact, it was criticized by almost all the philosophers of modernist thinking, but critical theorists have made very special effort to criticize Enlightenment rationality and declaring it as some kind of, totalitarian and everything else which is there. So for them, reason becomes very, arrogant kind of a thing. So the first major criticism of Enlightenment rationality is that it is totalitarian in nature. So in fact, there is a book written by William L. Scherer, Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, Third German Commonwealth. So therein he has developed that how the fascist and Nazi ideology was very much a development of European Enlightenment rationality, Kant, Hegel, and others, kind of a thing. So this right-wing totalitarianism is an outcome of it. And its reversal goes into the left-wing totalitarianism. And critical theorists have criticized both the kind of a thing. So observe the fundamental contradiction in the claim of enlightenment, the promise of enlightenment thinking that it would free human beings from dogmatism to liberate humanity from fear and dogmatism. But instead of doing so, modernity with science and technology created a new fear. They created institutions which became very authoritative and very suppressive to a great extent. So a new mode of fear has emerged, kind of a thing. The way we find these days, the kind of war phobia, which is, widespread. So I can see that I have little time left. So I'll just move a little faster. Very little is left now. So now what I'll do, I'll just give around 12 such features of postmodernity also. None of them should be taken as some kind of universal feature of it. These are all just suggestive, and this is something which is, it gives us some idea that what it is, what could be a postmodern thinking, kind of a thing. But it is not as clear and succinct as we have it in case of modernity. Next slide, please. So next one. So yes, here it is. So that it is an attitude, a mood without any system. In postmodernity, we find that they are not the system makers. Modernists were the system makers. Kant was a system maker. Even in the tradition of Greek philosophy also, we find that Plato was a system maker. So it was there. So, but postmoderns are not system makers because they found that the institutions and the systems of modernity are very authoritarian, oppressive, and dictatorial in very many ways. So, even the governmentality is also manifested in that process. How to govern the people with the help of the institutions. So postmoderns, they wanted to, defy the institutional domination of it. Second thing is that it is anti-foundational, anti-essentialism, anti-teleology, anti-logocentrism kind of a thing. And thirdly, it decenters human subjectivity. Like the way Descartes has done, that cogito is at the center of his philosophy as the first axiom of his philosophy. And cogito he defined as something which is knowing, feeling, willing, loving, judging, hating, etc. So these are the features of the cogito. But within cogito, there is madness, there is deception, there is uncertainty, there is a role of the demon also, there is fantasy, there is sexuality. After all, mind is the sexual organ. So, but Descartes has not developed these ideas. So what postmoderns have done, they have decentered the primary positions of the subjectivity, human subjectivity. Rather, they have taken up madness, sexuality, which varies from person to person. Fantasy also, there is no universal definition of fantasy also. People have it in different degrees and different ways of developing it. So some general assessment can be made at a very nominal level, but mostly it is something which is very well, subjectivity is not available. So it is a critique of all grand narratives, whether it is Enlightenment rationality, biologism of Hegel, or Marx's proletarian revolution, etc. So there is also irrationality, which is very much prevalent in the postmodern discourse, because rationality was used to create some kind of a grand narrative, totalizing effort of reason. So they thought that irrationality, because reality follows diverse models, and reality is mutually very conflictual in nature, because the reality which is there in Europe is not the same as we come across in Central Asia or Southeast Asian countries, or go to East, South Pacific, in South Asian countries, East Asian countries. Reality follows diverse models. about it. Power sectors are also fragmented. At least 6 power centers are there these days, which are available there. So it gets fragmented. Because earlier it was after the First World War, the world became uh, bipolar, and then after the collapse of socialism, for sometimes almost a decade or so, it was unipolar. So people wanted to have a new world order because it's a unipolar world. But then towards the end of the 20th century, we found that the world became multipolar. So a fresh new world order is required. Now again with this Ukraine war, geopolitics changing, you need another geopolitical framework, and a new world order has to be defined. So reality is following various models which are very conflictual in nature, and not one definition can be identified. Marginal minority rights are coming up very substantially, not the way the human rights was conceived as something very universal declaration of human rights, but something marginal. Local issues are coming up, plurality of issues are coming up, and shattered worldview is something which is very substantially there these days, and skepticism towards technocracy and also bureaucracy, very substantive issues are there. So these are some of the issues. Now in postmodernity, we do not find any kind of universalism. Rather, pluralism is coming up very substantially. Pluralism. Now towards the end of my presentation, so I have a few remarks to make, and this is the last slide, that postmodernity rejects the norms of strict logic and rationality which characterize modernity. It attempts to transcend the contours of system-prone thinking. It is it is at the center of modernity are foundationalism, essentialism, teleology, which include such issues as human subjectivity, the cogito, transcendental consciousness, the Geist, rationality, unity, science, morality, freedom, and so on. Whereas at the margins of modernity are such issues as madness, fantasy, demon, sexuality, pluralism, discontinuity, irrationality, fragmentation. Postmodernity underestimates the central issues of modernity and overestimates the marginal issues. This is one such observation which I have. And the second thing is that in postmodernity, reality follows diverse models which are rich in conflict. History is viewed as ruptures and mutations. That means there is a critique of historicity very substantially. And there is a radical negation of totalitarian thinking. In marginalizing, delimiting, discontinuing, and decentering the central issues of modernity, modernist inscriptions, the postmodernists, I feel, have expanded the horizons of modernity. This is modest in a way that I think no postmodernist will reject, because there is some kind of, though there is a substantive change in the nomenclature when postmodernity comes, but there is no absolute rejection of modernity. So the horizon of modernity gets expanded in a more profound manner with the nomenclature of postmodernity. Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for your patience. And I believe there are some questions in the chat bot. Let us see how it goes around. So over to you, Professor Panneerselvam.
Lecture. Okay. Yeah. And there are some questions in the chat box. What should I do? Should I read it out for you, or would you like to take up those questions from the chat?
I can read it myself if you want me.
Okay.
There are many.
Yeah. Santosh Kumar Paul has asked one question.
Yes, yes. There is Anupam Kumar. Postmodernity is regressive philosophy or progressive philosophy. Progressive, because it talks about marginal, not meta or grand narratives. Actually, this progressive and regressive, this was the discourse which was going on within modernity itself. They thought that Marxism is a very progressive ideology, and bourgeois is something which is very reactionary. Reactionary, they talk about, what does reactionary mean? You have suppose you have water and you boil it and the temperature rises, then what happens with the water? The water becomes reactive. It becomes so reactive that if you touch it, you get burnt. So with the rise of the temperature, it becomes reactive. So there are certain ideologies which are very reactive in nature. So if somebody is a Marxist, then they will think that all other ideologies are very reactionary. Right-wing ideologies are very reactionary kind of a thing. So, and they thought themselves very, very progressive. So, ideas are either revolutionary or, developmentalist. Two kinds of things are there. Like capitalist ideas are very developmentalist in nature. They make the society, institutions, and everything develop in a certain manner. But Marxist ideas are revolutionary in nature. So postmoderns are, in fact, they are not regressive in any way, because there are certain issues within modernist inscriptions which were not addressed properly by the modernists themselves. After all, the tribals, the marginals, the Dalits, they are part and parcel of the society. The subalterns, they are there, but they do not have any place in the history narratives. And if somebody is going to make an effort in that direction, then it has to be, expanding that horizon itself. Yeah. So it's a shift of emphasis, I should believe, that can be done. Then there is a question by Mr. Ganesh Prasad Das. Comment: it is not correct to say that Descartes does not deal with love, madness, etc. There are, according to him, belonging to human soul, lower soul, and these are so organized, orderly, rational, and to the heart. Very good question, GP Das. So I didn't say that he did not develop it. Like if you read the composition of the discourse on method and the meditations, he has used the term madness twice. So what are its philosophical implications? He has not developed it. He said that cogito has to be rational, and in the process of doubting, if you think that we do not have hands, legs, and we are not sitting before fire in our nightgown with a cup of coffee in hand, then he said that, am I mad? So doubt is something which cannot be diabolic. It has to stop therein. But what will happen if the person goes mad? See the debate between Foucault and Derrida on the cogito and the history of madness. And then they have developed the interiority and the exteriority of deception. And that how the interiority of deception is something which is more important. So what I'm suggesting is that Descartes has raised these issues, but he has not gone into the details of it the way he has gone into the details of cogito or the primary and the secondary qualities, and even to the existence of God, giving all kinds of four arguments, criterion of truth, etc., etc. This is what my submission is. Then
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. But there are two more questions there in the chat box.
I'll come to that.
Right.
Dr. Alok Tandon, he has asked, please drop your question here. No, okay. Anyway, there is another by Rajan Fogart.
May I ask? It will take time in dropping the question in the question box and then you reading it. Why to waste time?
May I ask you direct questions?
You can ask, but let me just finish it. I think it is very few ones.
Okay.
So here he says that postmodernism is an antithesis which may be regarded as a synthesis of both the Hegelian and Marxist sense. Can we have any future? Can we have any further? One exciting problem arises. Do we see the complete paradigm shift, etc., etc.? So anyway, then Bipin, confused by the views that from the front and unable to find any clear solution, did postmodernity become merely reactionary? And then Yadu Michael, does the claim to postmodernism that it is a move without any system, etc., etc.? These are some of the questions which I can, address in one go. Of course, Hegel and Marx, they were system makers, and they did take up the past ideas and ideologies together, proposed a critique, and the way they were trying to organize everything in a flexible manner, dynamic terms, with dynamic set of categories and concepts, is something which is very fantastic, very marvelous kind of a thing. But they all remain within modernist framework of thinking. So fragmentation and addressing the marginal issues did not come up. Even Hegel's lectures on the history of philosophy and the philosophy of history, the marginal issues were not addressed by him very substantially. Marx also did not do it. He could not, in fact, if you read his essays written in 1857, that was the time when he was the correspondent of the New York Daily Tribune, London correspondent of New York Daily Tribune. Then he was not aware of what kind of society India really is. So that way, that problem is there. Other things are there. I think I should come to Dr. Alok Tandon.
Yeah, thank you very much. First, a very, very small comment. We have talked about, as we have seen, that right from the very beginning, modernist thinkers like Marx, Weber, they internally criticized modernity. You talked about alienation of Marx, but why did you leave out disenchantment of Weber, which was later developed by Taylor when he talks about the three malaise of modernity, that is the meaninglessness, the sense of impending social dissolution. I think this darker side of modernity has not been taken full care of, criticized by the modernist thinkers themselves. Now the question comes, when you talk about rewriting of modernity, this is the phrase also associated with Jürgen Habermas. So the question will be, what is the difference between the Habermasian position of rewriting history and the postmodernists, who you say they are also rewriting modernity? So I think those two positions seems to coincide, but they must be a bit different. So your response on that. And my final question will be that how can you look into natural science from the angle of postmodernity when it talks about different models for understanding the reality? Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Alok, yes. The only thing is that please do not give the final question, because your questions are unending, and that way you are also very much, within the postmodern discourse, that, all the time there are questions, and it should be there. Yes, of course, I fully agree with you that within modernity there are philosophers, and there are philosophers who are against them. So behind every philosopher there is another philosopher, a better philosopher, who is criticizing. Descartes was criticized by Spinoza, then Leibniz, and then among the empiricists also there is a tradition. Kant even criticized not only the earlier philosophers, but even he criticized reason with reason itself. So, in the critique of pure reason, reason is both the subject and the predicate of the critique, kind of a thing. And that age is known as the age of criticism, age of skepticism. Even the kind of self which was so celebrated by Descartes starts collapsing when we come to David Hume, because he started questioning about it. Even in Kant also, the self is not something which is substance or a person, it's a kind of paralogism. There are a lot of contradictions. In fact, Michel Foucault, in his book Archaeology of Human Reason, he has said that modernist episteme is subject-centered, but the subject itself is collapsing within modernity itself. So it is there, that question is there. My argument is that, despite all these things, there are certain issues within modernist writing itself on which none of the modern philosophers have paid much attention to it. Like what could be the, deception, for instance. So Descartes said the senses are deceptive. But then there are deceptions within the concepts also. Concepts are also deceptive. So there will be exteriority of deception and there will be interiority of deception. And you need a higher way of, interrogating both the things. So exteriority of deception, is something which can be articulated with the help of, science, technology, and everything else. Yeah. So some people say that perception is the myth of the sense, human sense organs, and concepts are the myths of human intellectual organ, intellectual things. So they try to, create a kind of myth into all these realms. Now, the history writing is really something which is very problematic, and many philosophers have tried to, organize it and make some reflection on it. But some of the trends in the society, some of the forces in the society, like the subalterns, like the tribals, like the marginals, like the, people who speak a particular language, if they are not recognized in the discourse on history, then it becomes, that history is very incomplete. The other thing is that history is regarded as some kind of rupture and mutation. That means history is episodic in nature. So a kind of, historicist account is something which is not at all viable, like Hegel and Marx or Plato for that matter. That account is not viable at all. But the criticism which Popper has given to historicism, that also is not equally viable, because Popper could not come out with any kind of a concrete solution or suggestion that how to articulate the tribal history or the subaltern history or the history of the marginalized sections of the people. So these are the issues which needs to be re-looked at, and postmoderns, if they are trying to make any effort, that will be very commendable one. Habermas, I do not want to take up at this occasion because it requires a lot of explanation, and I think Professor Panirselvam can understand that it's really not possible to take up Habermas's position at this stage. What I have done in today's lecture is to float the ideas, basic ideas which are there, but maybe I can give a full lecture on Habermas someday, or Foucault and Derrida on some other occasions, or the critical theories kind of a thing. That will become a focused one on a particular philosopher. So for the time being, please excuse me for Habermas's account of it. That will take me a lot of time. So, or I leave it on the chair. If he allows me, then I can spend around 10-15 minutes on it. Over to you, Professor Panirselvam.
Yes. Thank you very much, sir. R.P. Singh ji.
Thank you, sir.
Professor, perhaps there was a misunderstanding of reading my question. So I'd like to repeat my question once again.
Yes, please.
My question was that, suppose if we consider modernism as a thesis and postmodernism as an antithesis, then what may be considered as a synthesis in Hegelian and Marxist sense? or am I making a mistake by considering postmodernism as an anti-modernism kind of thinking? And within this question, I have a question that, like, do you find any logical development from modernism to postmodernism, or is it a sudden paradigm shift? Because when we try to compare the fundamentals of modernism and postmodernism, both seems contradictory. However, you have shown a consistency or a logical linearity within the development of it. So
Yes,
how do you look at this problem?
Mr. Rajan, in fact, I did understand the question, but as I have said, and I've said it repeatedly, that no postmodern is anti-modern. So please do not make them antithesis kind of a thing, and then look for a solution of it. But rather there is, as in my concluding remarks, I have said that they have expanded the horizon of modernity itself. The only thing is that those issues were not much developed within modernist inscriptions. And now they are trying to philosophize on it. For instance, if the issues concerning deception is there, or madness is there, sexuality is there, and demon is there, then the philosophical arguments have not been given by the modernist writers, but the postmoderns are giving some arguments about it. So that way there is a continuity of thinking, and shift has been shifted. So now they are emphasizing the marginal issues. That was my submission.
Hello, sir. I am Professor Santosh Pal from University of Burdwan, West Bengal. I have put some questions. Most of the questions are answered in all these discussion. One thing is left, that is how could we identify our present Indian society, be it pre-modern, modern, or postmodern, or something else? Will you please tell something on this issue?
In fact, in the beginning itself, I had submitted that about India. I would not like to speak because it will take one full lecture.
Correct.
Yeah. So please excuse me, Santoshi. And some other occasion, maybe in your university, if you are invite me, I'll speak about it.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Professor R.P. Singh, sir, for your wonderful lecture. And of course, it is always a pleasure to listen to you. And you have clarified many things, I should say, especially the notion of modernity and also postmodernity. And I'm grateful to you for elaborating these two concepts in a very beautiful way. So we must be grateful to you as well as Professor Anand Mishra ji for giving us this wonderful opportunity of listening to you. Now, I would like to make some remarks as a chairperson of this session. Now, Professor R.P. Singh is a well-known specialist in postmodernism. So it is very clear from his lecture how there exists, I would say, continuity as well as discontinuity between modernism and postmodernism. Now, I would like to state that postmodernism has a reaction to modernism to some extent. Because postmodernism, though it has evolved as, I would call it as a movement, and also I would call it as a method, and also as an intervention. I would like to state all the three, because some might consider postmodernism as a movement, and some as a method, and some as intervention. But I would say that all the three aspects are available in postmodernism, for the main reason that when I say it is a movement, it is like a phenomenological movement or the hermeneutical movement. So there is nothing wrong in defining postmodernism as a movement. And also it could be viewed as a method. It is a method of philosophizing which has emerged in the 20th century, towards the end of 20th century. And also it is an intervention. To put Gadamerian terms here, one can say that postmodern understanding is an intervention towards some of the philosophical concepts which has been dominating us from the time of Plato onwards. So it is a movement, a method, and also an intervention. But it is very essential for us to ask the question whether there are any common characteristics of postmodernity. Here I always use this phrase. I would say that it is like analytical philosophy which has some common features. In postmodernism, we have questioned the concept of rationality, foundationalism, essentialism, Eurocentrism, one history as a concept, and grand narrative. Very beautifully, Professor R.P. Singh has pointed out the problems with regard to grand narrative. So postmodernism questions all these fundamental issues that are discussed in philosophy during the modern time. So this means the postmodernists have a different way of understanding. But at the same time, we must also know the fact that they do not have one single perspective or method. In short, we can say it emerged as a reaction to some of the traditional problems and problems that arose during the modern time. So the traditional approach to history has been questioned. The traditional approach to politics has been questioned. Culture has been questioned. So in this way, the postmodernists as philosophers who have revolted against some of the issues that are raised in modernity. So in modernity, in postmodernity, one can say new discourses have developed. And not only discourses, now new openings have also entered into postmodernism. This means there are certain fundamental or established paradigms which has to be questioned, and the postmodernists could successfully question these paradigms. But at the same time, we must also understand the fact that there is no common agreement among the philosophers with regard to postmodernism. In fact, this takes me back to Alok Tandon's very interesting question, asking how the Habermasian method is different from the other methods. In fact, here I would like to say that Habermas wrote a very interesting masterpiece, that is Modernity and Incomplete Project, wherein he shows that there is a need for us to criticize thinkers like Lyotard, Foucault, and others who are writing, of course, on postmodernism. And he says that there is a need for us to criticize the whole group of philosophers who talked about the enlightenment of modernity, because there is a different way of approaching modernity. In fact, Habermas would say that the main problem with modernity, or one of the major problems of modernity, is that it gave a lot of space for rationality. And by using rationality as one of the important categories of understanding, they've neglected the significance of the other. For example, the significance of the downtrodden people, females, and others. So this is one of the major objections of Habermas. So there is no commonality with regard to postmodernism, but in spite of that, we can find out some common elements, or we can show that there could be some common elements. Otherwise, we can't call them as postmodernists. For example, Foucault, Lyotard, Jameson, all these are, all these thinkers are known as postmodern thinkers. But what is interesting is that the postmodernists are the people who are mainly responsible for developing this post-structuralism, which has been playing a very important role. So one can see the synthesis between post-structuralism and postmodernism, and their method of understanding is something different. In fact, in the chat box, I could see, and how I see that Professor Singh has very beautifully answered the question whether postmodernism is progressive or regressive. Definitely, it is a progressive method or methodology or a movement, because it tries to solve some of the problems that arose in the context of modernity. Now, modernity has given a lot of promises, as Professor R.P. Singh sir in the beginning itself said. There were a lot of promises, but all these promises were not fulfilled by the modernists. That is a major issue that we have to take into account while discussing the rift between modernism and postmodernism. For example, in modernity, we talk about objectivity, whereas in postmodernity, we talk about solidarity. And similarly, in modernity, we talk about totalization, but whereas in postmodernity, we are talking about fragmentation, which was pointed out by Professor R.P. Singh sir. Then modernity is universal, whereas postmodernity is particular. And modernity spoke about self, whereas postmodernity, the other. And modernity spoke about the absolute, whereas here we have the relative concept. And one talk of that is modernity talked about uniformity, whereas postmodernity talked about pluralism. So this this division between these, one example I can take, objectivity and solidarity. For example, Richard Rorty has pointed out how the concept of solidarity is very important in the context of human society. So there is always a rift which one can see between modernity and postmodernity. And modernity, of course, there was a political, social, and cultural transformation. But this cultural transformation and political transformation are important, no doubt, but they took a human race to a different direction. For example, in modernity, the celebrated concept is rationality. This was also pointed out by Professor R.P. Singh in a very beautiful way, rationality. But reason actually has turned into its opposite. That was the main drawback of modernity. So modernity, though it had a lot of promises, they could not keep up their promises. So there is a need for developing this postmodernism. So definitely it is a progressive method, but we cannot say that postmodernism has solved all the problems. One of the very important concepts, which once again I would say Professor Singh has pointed out, is that all the meta-narratives, which is celebrated concept in modernity, has been questioned by postmodern thinkers. For example, Lyotard talks about, instead of meta-narratives, he talks about mini-narratives. So this means the culture, the subcultures, which are very important, has to be celebrated. And we cannot think of one universal culture. There can be plurality of culture, and the subculture, the significance of subculture has to be celebrated. And postmodernity has given a space for that. And also we should remember the fact that it is in postmodernity, we question some of the basic assumptions which has been predominating in philosophical discourse. One example which I would like to give here is the contribution of Jacques Derrida. Now, Derrida, instead of constructing something, he has deconstructed everything by saying that there is always a problem with regard to the center, which philosophers are fond of talking from the time of Plato up to Heidegger. What is that center? The center is something on which every philosophical concept is based. And around this center, all other concepts go around, which means there is always a bipolar concept. And once we keep, for example, mind, body, space and time, male, female, speech versus writing, culture versus nature. So once we have this bipolar concept, what we try to do is we try to celebrate one concept over the other. So it is necessary for thinkers like Derrida to question the basic assumptions of philosophy. For example, consciousness or the concept of being, or in Indian concept, though he has not talked about Indian concept, we can place a Brahman or a moksha there. So we have to rethink some of the philosophical concepts by using the tools which are given by the postmodern thinkers. But how far they would be successful in their attempt, we don't know. But here is a new method of philosophizing. So here is a new way of understanding some of the philosophical concepts, and there is a need for us to progress. And this progress can come to us through the guidance of the postmodern thinkers. Since modernity has got some great promises which they could not fulfill, we have to turn towards postmodernism. And as a result of that, some new methods are arising. One method which I would like to state is Foucault's understanding of historiography, for example. Foucault talks about historiography, and he rejects the methodology of Hegel, who has given a conventional historiography. So in its place, Foucault develops the synthetic approach to history, wherein he says the methodology practiced by the conventional historiography or Hegel's historiography rejects the other, rejects the downtrodden people, rejects the Oriental people. So there is a need for us, according to Foucault, there is a need for us to revise the conventional form of historiography. And he says, let us develop a discontinuous history, which means he says history always has some gaps, and these gaps have to be fulfilled. So we cannot have one conventional history which can take care of everything. There is a need for us to transcend this and develop a synthetic method to historical methods. And in this approach, or this method of approach given by Foucault was later developed by Edward Said, for example. In his well-known book, Orientalism, he talks about how there is a division, that is how the Western society or the Western history has classified human beings into two categories. On the one side, the Western people, on the other side, the Oriental people. And it is said that the subject of knowledge is placed in the Westernized society, whereas on the other hand, this Oriental people, it is said that they don't have knowledge and they have to all the time depend on the Westernized people. So this classification or this dichotomy which exists in historiography has to be replaced by the method which is developed by Foucault and Edward Said. So postmodernity has given a new direction to us, no doubt, but it also has not fulfilled all its promises, because it is a continuity. There is a continuity between modernity and postmodernity. Postmodernity, though one can say it came as a revolt to modernism, it has taken, as Professor Singh sir has pointed out, it has taken many of the elements of modernism. So it is not a radical break. It is not a radical break. It has taken many of the concepts or borrowed the concepts from modernity, but at the same time, it also points out some of the deficiencies of modernity. So in this way, one can say postmodernism is a new methodology which has to be adopted, which has to be practiced in philosophical discourse. And I would always try to apply this methodology to Indian philosophical system. And there was one very interesting question in the chat box, whether this could be applicable to Indian philosophical tradition, whether our society is pre-modern or modern or postmodern. Here, I would like to quote late Professor Suresh Chandra. When this question was addressed to him, he said, it was a joke, of course, don't take it seriously. He said, when India is not even pre-modern, where is the question of modernity or postmodernity come in Indian context? But I would like to see the problem from different perspective. I would say that many of the philosophical concepts which we have developed in Indian philosophy or Indian philosophical tradition contain some of the salient features of postmodernity. So it is, what I'm trying to say is this postmodern understanding is not something new to us. This does not mean that in Indian philosophy we have everything. We can interpret some of the philosophical concepts which you have in Indian philosophy, and we can show that the so-called new methods, I want to use this word, the so-called new methods which the Westerners have developed could be seen in Indian philosophical tradition also. So postmodernism is one of the very important methods or one of the important movements which cannot be neglected, and it contains the various elements which are present in pre-modern as well as modernity. So it is a continuous process. And Professor Singh sir, when he pointed out the statement of Toynbee, I was very much fascinated, because it was Toynbee who writes about this in detail, that how the human society could develop from pre-modernity to modernity and to postmodernity. So in this way, I feel that postmodernity has to be approached, and this is a high time for us to see how modernity, of course, modernity, we say it has got a lot of good things, but it also has some problems. For example, the great contribution of modernists is rationality. And another important contribution of rationality is, modernity is industrial revolution. All these are fine, but it has considered human being as a machine, or it has reduced human being as a machine. So these are some of the problems, and it also neglected, as Habermas very rightly said, it has neglected the significance of the other, or the downtrodden, or the people who are in the lower level. So this is very much, so postmodernism is very much essential in order to fulfill the gaps which we find in modernism. So this is what I would like to state as my concluding remark. And I'm very grateful to Professor R.P. Singh for his wonderful exposition. And this was a very beautiful exposition, without taking any stand in the sense, without depending on any particular thinker, postmodern thinker as a whole. He has given some of the beautiful contribution of these thinkers, at the same time pointing out some of the problems which we find both in modernism and postmodernism. So I thank the Department of Philosophy, especially to my good friend Professor Anand Mishra ji for giving this nice opportunity. And also I see Professor Gangadhar, Professor Ganesh Prasad ji, Alok Tandon ji, Samshiv Prasad ji, and many others. My good friends are available here. And it is a pleasure to see all of you in this webinar. And I thank the department for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you very much.
We must thank all.
You are not audible.
Is he asking the question? Is he asking the question?
Priyanka, you are not audible.
Well, may I speak something?
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to thank all the two speakers, very learned speakers. As usual, Professor Singh has always been very serious to any philosophical issues, and he has given a good development of postmodernism in European land. But I wanted to say something, that what about the Indian context? Where do we have postmodernism? Do we have or no? It is a clarification for Pandit Selvam-ji. Why we should concentrate only to the Western European theories? Have we not developed Indian concept of postmodernism? At this time, I reminded of my professor here in Banaras Hindu University, Professor N.K. Devraja, who has given a very, very beautiful contribution regarding the postmodernism in Indian situation, and with his views on humanism. And then he gave a creative humanism. Professor Singh might be remembering Professor Devraj, who always used to speak of this art, culture, values, and literature. Through this, the philosophical movement should develop, as Professor Paneer Selvam says, it is a movement. Okay, it is a movement, but here in India also. So this is my small observation.
Professor Singh, would you like to say something on this?
Yeah,
Then I'll tell.
just briefly, because in case of India, there is no rupture between tradition and modernity. So there are many issues and concepts from the tradition itself, which we find that it has found a very recognized place in the modernity. And most of the modern philosophers, like from Raja Ram Mohan Roy to Sri Aurobindo, they all have tried to revive and revitalize the tradition of India. Because within the tradition, we have a lot of plurality, which was already available, addressing many issues, and developing no grand narrative kind of a phenomenon. So at the same time, so why to go about this thing that if the West has modernity and post-modernity and beyond post-modernity, postmodern, why should we articulate in that framework? Our tradition is vibrant, it is very healthy tradition, and it can incorporate all those fragmented pictures which we find from the West. Yeah. So let us divert the discourse. Let's take a U-turn. Begin from Indian philosophy, and this is very strongly placed, and then see that how the West is copying it. And there is a lot of U-turn. In fact, if you give me opportunity next time, some other time, I'll take up these issues in a substantive manner. That for the last around 20 years, I've been watching it. There is a U-turn now which has come up. People have started recognizing it, the contribution of India. In philosophical terms, it was found in the 70s and earlier than that also. But now at the cultural and philosophical level, people are coming back to it. So otherwise, the story is in a very pathetic manner. Like in the 2 world wars, Germany lost the war. So German philosophy, though it is 100 times better than English philosophy, but it was not recognized by the people. Britishers, they won the game, and their analytic philosophy, became everything. Those who had studied anything, damn thing from in UK, they find a place in Indian tradition. So let us decolonize our mind and think of in a manner that, India can stand on its own philosophically. And if it can give anything to the world, it is philosophy only that we can give to it. In fact, Professor Paneer Selvam, Professor D.P. Chattopadhyay, they were all trying to, come out with this narrative from the 80s onwards of the last century. And now I think we should have our own universals, our own assertions, isn't it? But there are many issues that can be developed on it. Yeah. Over to you, Professor Paneer Selvam.
Thank you, Professor R.P. Singh, for your beautiful answer to Professor Gangadharji. Yes, I also agree with Professor R.P. Singh, sir, because in Indian context, one need not or one cannot make a distinction between the pre-modern, modern, and post-modern. Because why? Because in the Indian methodology is something different. Why? As Professor R.P. Singh has pointed out, it is a tradition in India. It is a tradition which connects the pre-modern, modern, and the postmodern. So far as, for Indian philosophy or Indian philosophers, there is no need for us to make a distinction between these three. But in spite of that, I would say that this answer will not solve the problem. But because when Westerners say, or the Western philosophers say that we have got this method, this postmodern method, and they have developed the postmodern method also. And so it is not the case that this is not something new to us. This is what I'm trying to say. It is not these methods which the so-called Westerners are talking about is not alien to us. It is implicit in our classical systems of Indian philosophy. And if you read modern philosophy, as Sir has pointed out, Raja Ram Mohan Rai and others, where you can see the methodology, and also the contemporary thinkers and the recent Indian philosophers like Sundaraj and D.P. Chattopadhyaya, Daya Krishna, and many others, all these methods you can see because they are well aware of these methods. In fact, Prof. Daya has written a beautiful volume published by the Shimla Institute on this issue of postmodernism. He thoroughly criticized this methodology of postmodernism. So these methods are not new to us. I'll give one more example and then with that I'll stop. Professor H.G. Coward, some of you must be knowing, a well-known philosopher from Canada, who wrote on Derrida and Shankara. And he says the Derridian methodology is very much present in Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. So the methodologies are not something alien to us, or it is not something remarkable to us. We can. That's why I said while giving my note on process talk, I said that in Indian philosophical tradition, we too have such methods. When we reinterpret, we can find out and we can tell the Western world that these methods are very much available to us. For example, take phenomenological method, take the hermeneutical method, right? Like the cognitive linguistics, which Westerners are talking about. So all these methods are very much present in Indian tradition. And there is a need for us to reinterpret and to tell the Western world that the so-called methods are not new to us. It is very much within our tradition. So it is, as very rightly pointed out by Professor Singh, that we have to decolonize the Indian philosophical tradition because we are often controlled, I would say, controlled by the Western philosophical methods. And it is high time for us to go back to our tradition, and we have to tell the Western world that you please read Indian philosophical tradition so that you can find out the methods which you are talking about are very much present in Indian tradition. So this is what we have to do now, because it is not, I'm not against Western tradition, but at the same time, we have very strong roots in Indian philosophical tradition. Our great sages, saints, and many rishis have given us some new ideas. The only thing is we fail to explain that to the Western world. That is the reason why Professor Jain Mohanty has pointed out that it is not the case that all the time we ape the West, all the time we read the West. It is high time for the Westerners also to read Indian philosophical tradition. So these methods are not something new. So this is what I would like to tell Professor Gangadhar. Thank you.
Hope I'm audible. Thank you so much, Professor Singh and Professor Paneerselvam, for enlightening us with your wisdom and with your kind words. Now I would request Dr. Rahul Maurya for vote of thanks. Over to you, Dr. Rahul.
Okay. Am I audible, Dr. Priyanka?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. So thank you, Priyanka ji, for giving me this opportunity to formally propose vote of thanks to our speaker as well as the chair of the session. It is indeed an honor and privilege to thanks to our own teacher, Professor R.P. Singh sir, who has taught me and as well as Dr. Priyanka at our MPhil courses at Jawaharlal Nehru University. So thank you so much, Professor Singh sir, for your enlightening talk and delivering and engaging with the post-modernity as well as modernity at length, especially the characteristics that you have brought out to delineate about modernity, and within the project of modernity, how this post-modernity has actually arisen. So your engagement has been really comprehensive, and it has been really enlightening for us, especially to many of our students who are working on this area, as well as for teachers who are actually developing their research interest in this area. So it has been really immensely beneficial for us. Next, I would like to thank our chair, Professor Paneer Selvam sir, who has been always in every talk that this department has been organizing. Sir has been present and making his profound comments. And even in today's lecture, sir has really make the thought-provoking comments, especially talking about how in Indian context also these methodologies have been available. The only thing that we need to further work out and compete with the Western philosophers who are dealing on this postmodernist project. So thank you so much, sir, for your profound comments on today's topic. Next, I would like to thank our head of the department, Professor Anand Mishra, who has been behind all these academic activities, especially the Saturday seminar that this department is carrying out. He is the source of inspiration and encouragement, and that is moving us to have to witness these continuous academic activities. So thank you so much, sir, for your serious engagement and your concern for academic discussions. Next, I would like to thank many of the professors from our department as well as from the other universities who have been actively participating. Let me take their names, whatever names I can possibly see here, like I can see Professor Gangadhar sir, who has been also always present in every talk that we hold. I can see Dr. Prashant Suklaji. He is also present in our today's discussion. Dr. Jayanti P. Sahu, who is faculty at Janki Devi Memorial College, where I have also previously taught. She is also there. So thank you so much, ma'am. Dr. Vivek Pandey sir, Dr. Ganesh Prasad sir, Dr. Kalpana Yadav. Next, I can see Sambasiva Prasad sir, and yeah, so and Dr. Neeti Singh and Dr. Shruti Mishra ma'am. I can also see Professor Durgesh Chaudhary sir was also present. Professor SP Pandey sir was also present, and they all have actively participated and made this seminar, this today's talk successfully. And at the last, I would like to thank the research scholars and students who are really essential component and integral part of any seminar or any academic discussions, without whom we could not successfully complete any webinar or seminar. So thank you all and everyone for attending this seminar and making it grand success. Thank you all once again. Thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Priyanka.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rahul. And now, with the permission of the chair, I end the session. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you.